The man who helped shorten World War II by breaking the Enigma codes did not receive a medal when peace came. He received a charge sheet, and within a few years, those lines in a 1952 courtroom record would erase his clearance, his career, and ultimately, his life. The same state that had once depended on his ability to read the intentions of an enemy across continents would later define him entirely through the narrow language of a criminal statute. In the absence of public knowledge about his wartime role, the documentary trail that survived from his final years shows only the slow constriction of options, the procedural steps of a legal case, and the quiet disappearance of a man whose greatest contributions still lay sealed in classified archives. Before the legal proceedings and the hormone treatments, there had been a different world altogether, one built on abstraction, logic, and the atmosphere of academic inquiry. Turing's early work at Cambridge in the mid-1930s focused on the limits of mechanical computation, producing the concept of the Turing machine, an idealized model that defined what it meant for a problem to be solvable by algorithm. It was not a blueprint for a device, but a theoretical framework that later became one of the foundations of computer science. This research established him as a rising figure in mathematical logic, yet none of it foretold the environment in which he would soon apply his abilities. That transition came abruptly in 1939, when Britain prepared for a conflict in which information itself would become a strategic weapon. Bletchley Park, a country estate turned code-breaking facility, operated under strict secrecy from the moment war was declared. Its rooms and makeshift huts, filled with mathematicians, linguists, engineers and clerks who shared a single task: transform intercepted German radio messages into actionable intelligence before the information expired. The German armed forces relied on the Enigma cipher machine, whose rotating rotors and plugboard settings produced vast numbers of possible letter substitutions. Enigma's strength lay not only in its mechanical complexity, but also in its daily changing configurations, which made each morning a new cryptanalytic challenge. Manual testing of possible keys was effectively impossible. The task demanded a mechanized, systematic method of eliminating contradictions at scale. Turing approached the problem with the same logic-driven perspective that had shaped his academic work. He designed an electromechanical device, the bomb, that could test entire clusters of possible Enigma settings by exploiting known or suspected fragments of plain text within intercepted messages. The machine did not solve Enigma in a single leap. It eliminated impossibilities until only viable settings remained. Once identified, these settings allowed teams to decrypt entire streams of military traffic. The machines built from Turing's design operated in long rows, their drums spinning in coordinated sequences, generating results that fed directly into the Allies' strategic decisions. Inside Hut 8, where Turing's team focused on German naval communications, the atmosphere was one of constant urgency. The decrypted traffic guided convoy routing across the Atlantic, enabling the British Admiralty to maneuver ships away from U-boat patrol lines and reduce losses that had threatened the nation's survival. The improvements appeared not in headlines, but in quiet statistics. A drop in sinkings during particular months, a better-informed deployment of escorts, a subtle shift in the balance of naval power. Those who worked in the huts saw none of these outcomes directly. Their measure of success was simply a stack of decipherable messages arriving in time to matter. Throughout the war, secrecy obscured all individual contributions. Personnel were instructed to avoid discussing their work even with those closest to them. Promotions, public recognition, and medals were impossible within the constraints of intelligence protocol. When the war finally ended in 1945, the code-breaking enterprise was dismantled as abruptly as it had been assembled. Machinery was destroyed or archived, Documents were locked behind classifications that would last for decades. The expertise developed in the huts did not translate into public authority or influence. Turing left Bletchley Park with no record he could cite and no evidence he could present of the magnitude of what he had done. He returned to civilian research, first at the National Physical Laboratory and later at the University of Manchester, turning his attention to the design of early computing machines. His ideas on stored program architecture, numerical computation, and machine intelligence placed him at the frontier of a technology that would eventually redefine entire fields. Yet this work unfolded in an environment where institutional support was inconsistent, budgets were limited, and bureaucratic obstacles were common. More critically, the secrecy surrounding his wartime contributions meant he lacked the formal recognition that might have strengthened his standing within these emerging disciplines. At the same time, Turing lived under a legal system that regarded his private life as a potential criminal matter. Mid-century British law classified homosexual acts as gross indecency, punishable by imprisonment. Security policies of the early Cold War added another layer of scrutiny, treating individuals whose private lives rendered them vulnerable to blackmail as potential risks to national security. The reasoning was impersonal but rigid. A man with a secret the state did not approve of could be coerced by hostile powers. In this climate, personal vulnerability became institutional vulnerability. The law that governed his private life and the security protocols that governed his professional eligibility intersected with consequences neither system had been designed to accommodate. The chain of events that led to Turing's prosecution began in 1951 with a burglary at his Manchester home. When he reported the incident, the police investigation expanded beyond the theft itself. Notes from the inquiry show how quickly the focus shifted once investigators learned details about his relationship with another man. The burglary became secondary. The legal framework of indecency took precedence. By early 1952, the police had gathered statements they believed established a violation of the statute. In an era when moral conduct and national security were routinely spoken of in the same breath, the process unfolded with bureaucratic precision. The court proceedings that followed reflected the narrow scope of the law. The transcript does not mention his wartime service or his contributions to national defense. Those matters were still protected by the Official Secrets Act and could not be introduced even as mitigating context. The trial concerned only the statute and whether its conditions had been met. Turing entered a plea and was presented with two options: imprisonment or probation, conditional upon undergoing a course of hormonal treatment intended to suppress libido. The treatment, consisting of synthetic estrogen injections, was described in medical records with clinical detachment. Its effects included physical changes, chemical alterations, and a forced intrusion into bodily autonomy that extended far beyond the penal system's official rationale. Parallel to the sentencing, security reviews assessed the implications of his conviction. Regulations treated individuals convicted under indecency laws as automatically unsuitable for work requiring clearance. The rationale centered on vulnerability to coercion, not on past loyalty or service. The effect was the same. Turing's access to classified information was revoked. Even if he had wished to return to cryptanalytic work, the administrative doors were now closed. The classification system that had once concealed the magnitude of his contributions now concealed the context in which he was barred from further service. Professionally, he continued his research, but the boundaries around him tightened. Some colleagues maintained contact and valued his intellect. Others, constrained by the norms of the time, kept their distance. Invitations to collaborate became less frequent. Institutional roles requiring official vetting were no longer available to him. While his published work continued, it did so in an atmosphere increasingly marked by isolation and diminished opportunity. The mechanisms that had once rewarded his clarity of thought now operated in ways that limited his professional reach. The medical treatment imposed by the court lasted a year. Its documented side effects included weight gain, mood disturbances, and other physiological changes. None of these effects were considered in relation to his work or well-being. The treatment existed solely as a condition of legal compliance. It represented a form of correction in the language of the state and a form of punishment in practice. For Turing, it meant the unavoidable awareness that his body was being altered under state authority and that his autonomy, so central to his intellectual life, had been compromised in a way that could not be separated from the legal judgment against him. On June 1954, Turing was found dead at his home in Wilmslow. The coroner's report identified cyanide poisoning as the cause of death. A partially eaten apple lay nearby, though it was not tested for cyanide. The inquest concluded suicide. No evidence emerged to contradict that conclusion, and the files from the investigation contain no indications of external involvement. The death of a 41-year-old mathematician was noted briefly in the press, with references to his work in computing and logic, but no acknowledgement of his wartime contributions, which remained classified. For the public, his name passed quietly into the background of academic history. Only decades later, as wartime records were declassified and memoirs published, did the full scope of his service become visible. The bomb machines, once concealed inside restricted facilities, appeared in historical analyses as precursors to modern computation. The decrypted messages from German naval traffic revealed how critical the work of Hut 8 had been to Allied strategy. Scholars revisited the timeline of the Battle of the Atlantic and noted correlations between code-breaking successes and shifts in naval outcomes. In this newly illuminated context, the story of Turing's prosecution no longer stood alone. It became part of a broader pattern, showing how the law had treated individuals whose contributions the state had not yet acknowledged. Public re-evaluation of his case grew steadily. By the 1990s, calls for an official apology had intensified, supported by academics, activists, and public figures who viewed the case not only as an individual injustice, but as a reflection of discriminatory laws no longer in force. In 2013, the British government issued a royal pardon, recognizing that the law applied to him had been unjust. The pardon did not alter any historical facts. It did not reverse the medical treatment, restore the clearance, or reopen opportunities long since foreclosed. It operated solely at the level of symbolic redress, acknowledging that the statute had failed to align with principles of dignity and fairness. The truth of Turing's life emerges today through a combination of once classified wartime documents, technical papers on computation, and legal and medical records from the early 1950s. Each set of documents reflects a different system of authority. The military apparatus that relied on his intellect, the academic world that advanced through his ideas, and the legal system that condemned him according to the standards of its time. None of these systems fully comprehended the others while he lived. The result was a sequence of events in which recognition, protection, and support lagged far behind contribution. The cost of that truth was borne entirely by the individual who had carried it through the war in silence. His name now stands at the center of histories of computing, cryptanalysis, and artificial intelligence. But those histories were written only after the forces that shaped his final years had already done their work. The state that eventually honored him could not return the life narrowed by secrecy, constrained by law, and ended in isolation. What remains is the documentary imprint of a life in which the timing of truth, its concealment, its exposure, and its belated acknowledgement proved as decisive as the truth itself.